by relation. Welcome to our program today. As we near the end of Women's History Month, I'm excited to have you join us today as we feature 4 dynamic, impressive, and successful alumnae who will share their stories from Northeastern to now. Before the program begins, I want to take a minute to go over a couple of logistical details. We are recording this event and will upload it to the Northeastern Alumni YouTube channel within the next few business days. Participation in this event means that you have consented to being recorded. Throughout the program, feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A box on the toolbar, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can. And now, without further ado, I would like to turn the screen over to our moderator for the afternoon, College of Arts, Media, and Design student, Tim Van Bloem.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Lori. So, hi everyone. My name is Timothy Van Bloem, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm currently a second-year music history student here at Northeastern, involved on campus in things like the Student Advisory Board and Nor'easter's Acapella. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Catherine and Melanie for getting me on board with this amazing panel for International Women's Day. So, allow me to introduce our amazing panelists. First, we have Sabrina Boyd Circa, an alumna of Northeastern's Music Industry Leader Graduate Program in 2016. After working at Universal Music Group Nashville, launching her own marketing service, and becoming the executive brand director at Social Nova Events, Sabrina now works at WHY Radio, the premier public radio in Philadelphia, in radio operations and as an audio producer. Next, we have Colleen Hall, a music industry graduate from 2009. After working at Brick Wall Management, Sound Exchange, and Universal Music Group, Colleen is now a manager of business and legal affairs at Sony Music Publishing, having worked in the contact administration and digital business affairs since 2014. Stephanie Joseph, another alumna of Northeastern's Music Industry Leadership Graduate Program from 2016, has an extensive resume in the Universal Music Group family. Having conducted A&R operations for Demi Lovato, Shawn Mendes, Nick Jonas, and more, Stephanie now works across 3 major labels: Records, Def Jam Recordings, and Republic Records, in clearing music for these labels and negotiating rights. Last but not least, we have Melanie Shark, a double Husky alumna of both the undergraduate and graduate programs here at Northeastern. She has worked at Cobalt Music, Sound Exchange, and the Kennedy Center to try to simplify copyright. She is now the licensing program manager at Mandolin, a live streaming platform that was involved in #IVoted, the largest digital music festival history to date. Thank you so much for the 4 of you for joining us today. It's such an honor to have you here. Not only do we have 4 amazing alumni on this panel, but we have representation from different corners of the industry, which is really exciting. To everyone who's just joining, please make sure to keep submitting questions. We'll be taking questions throughout the entire panel. Let's get started. Our first question is, what does an average day look like in your life? Or go into a little more detail about what it is that you do. And Sabrina, since I introduced you first, would you mind taking the floor?
Sure. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. So great to be here and to be talking to you all. So my job has a couple of different elements in public radio. So the station I work for, WHYY, is the local NPR affiliate here in Philadelphia. The radio operations part of my job is really a lot of database management. We get all of the files for the program, not to get too into the weeds here, but we get audio files from NPR, from APM, promos, things like that, and I'm putting them all in the system and making sure they're ready to go on the air. I also record the underwriting, which is basically commercials, but for nonprofits. So I record those. You'll hear my voice in little 30-second bits if you ever tune in. And then the audio production side is where I get to be more fun and creative, producing podcasts and sometimes news features for the station. So no day is typical, but what my responsibilities for that can be anything from reaching out, contacting sources, scheduling interviews, actually doing interviews, recording all of these things, and then of course editing all of the audio, putting them together, putting in music and making it sound really polished and a piece that's ready to go on the radio. So I sort of slid from the music industry a little sideways into a tangential industry, being radio and audio production, but we can talk later about exactly how the path led me to where I am.
That's so cool, and I'll definitely be listening out for your voice now on the radio. Next up, Colleen, would you talk to us a bit about what an average day looks like in your life?
I'm in the business affairs department at Sony Music Publishing, and I sort of straddle my time between contract administration, where I'm reading, summarizing, administering our songwriter deal. So I'm reading every writer we sign, reading their contract, summarizing it, making sure that our obligations to the writers are fulfilled, that their obligations to us are fulfilled and tracked, and that includes everything from song deliveries to advances and royalties being paid out. And on the other side of things, I'm sort of dealing with outgoing licensing in our digital business affairs world. This past year has been especially interesting in that realm, and that all kinds of new apps and services are moving forward and looking for music licensing. And we're just sort of exploring that and making sure that their services and apps are licensed, and we're able to get our writers paid for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's so much happening. So props to you for saving the writers of the world. Stephanie, can you please talk to us a little about what you do on an average day, even though I know you have far from average days in your career?
Well, right now it feels pretty average because we're all remote, but there is a lot going on right now. But basically, I also work in business affairs, but in the clearance department. So what I do, sorry, am I still muted? It says.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. So what I do is I work with the department's musicologist. His name's Ian Allen. He's a really cool Jamaican dude that's been in the industry for a really long time. And he has an amazing ear. So what he does is he'll listen to literally every song that gets released by Def Jam, Republic, or Island, just to make sure that we're not infringing on anyone's copyright. Make sure that if we are using like a sample or an interpolation, that it's accounted for, that we reach out and obtain those rights, or we remove it and we make sure that it's effectively removed. Another thing that I do alongside of that is I'll review lyrics line by line, which thank God I don't have to do that by myself anymore. But basically, sometimes there's little hints in the lyrics when there's like someone is using someone else's words, and as long as it has to be something that's distinct, that's not generic. And sometimes that kind of gives us a clue. There might be a sample, or there might be like some kind of melody that's being taken. And in rap, it's a little bit confusing, but you could take people's flows and cadences, and we have to be really careful about that. But then the other side of my job has more to, it's not contractual, but it's similar to that in the sense that I'll send requests to outside labels when we want to use one of their artists on our songs. Like, for example, say Drake wants to use Kendrick Lamar on a song. So we would reach out to Interscope and ask for the rights to release the music with Kendrick on it. And they have to approve of his performance, everything like that. And they might request a certain royalty or something of that nature. Yeah, and that's about it. Oh, and then also I also receive requests from outside labels for our artists, and then same thing, vice versa.
That's amazing. So you're like the last line of defense for the label to avoid getting sued.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Awesome. And then finally, Melanie, could you please speak to us a little about what you do and what an average day in your life might look like?
Yeah, sure. So I recently, in December, joined a company called Mandolin, which is an online concert platform. Hopefully you've heard of us. It's been a really fun switch of type of role. Before that, I was at the Kennedy Center and was put on furlough during this fun COVID time. But I found Mandolin through I Voted, which was my sort of passion project during furlough. And Mandolin was the platform we selected out of probably 12 or 13 that we demoed. just because they have a really great team, very entrepreneurial. Everyone seemed at the top of their game. So like right after I voted, I asked them if they needed any help with licensing, and they did. So I'm the licensing program manager there. I spend a lot of my days explaining licensing to people. That's like the majority of it, to clients, to people internally, and also requesting licenses from people like Colleen here and Stephanie, for both the sync licenses and, well, master use licenses for our live shows where we have like DJs or R&B or hip hop artists, and then sync licenses from both of those houses, for shows that we have available on demand after the live show. So it's just a lot of licensing, and then we're a global platform, so getting PRO licenses from all of the different countries is super fun too. So that's what I do.
That's so cool. It's like you get a passion project into a job. I feel like that's like the go-to. So, that's amazing. Now, you all started at Northeastern, but you've all ended up in different and equally exciting places. So I was hoping you could tell me and everyone watching a little bit about your journey. To switch up the order a little bit, maybe let's start with Colleen. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you got to where you are from graduation?
So I graduated in 2009, which was not a very auspicious time for job hunting, and I kind of moved to DC on a whim. And I will say that the intro to co-op class certainly prepared me for emailing anyone and everyone in DC, where there's not a huge music industry, but there's, you know, little bits and pieces here and there, asking if they needed an intern, a part-time employee, a full-time employee, absolutely anything. And my first bite back was from Sound Exchange. They were sort of expanding their legal department and their licensing and enforcement division. And I started there. Eventually knew that I either wanted to go to law school or end up in New York, and kind of just followed job listings and eventually found something at EMI Music, moved up to New York. And shortly thereafter, EMI was bought by Universal, made a quick transition. And a couple years later, Sony Music Publishing had an offering, and I kind of jumped at it. So a lot of the resume writing, keeping your contacts on LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff definitely comes in handy when you're just out there trying to find something.
That's so cool. And during your time at Sony, I know you climbed the ranks a little bit. Could you speak about that as well?
Sure. I started as a coordinator in the business affairs department, doing strictly contract admin. And as I sort of moved up a little bit, I just started asking questions. Anything that somebody was doing within our business affairs department, there's several different groups. There's people who work on sampling, like what Stephanie does with, you know, clearing interpolations and things like that. There's our legacy catalog administrators. There's our digital department, and you just have to kind of be curious and ask your questions. And when the time is right, if, you know, people need help, make yourself available and be curious, be interested, and don't be afraid to put yourself out there to learn and eventually to get a job doing that.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Let's go to Melanie now. Melanie, could you talk a little bit about your journey to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. It's funny you chose that order. Colleen and I actually both started out at Sound Exchange, but never met each other until like 3 weeks ago when we were on a call. And I was just like, your name is so familiar. How do I know you? And then it turns out we were both at Northeastern and both in the legal department at Sound Exchange, which is crazy small world stuff. So I started at Sound Exchange, which was actually where I did one of my co-ops. So after graduation, while I was job hunting, asked them if they needed an intern. I didn't want to spend my time just searching for a job while doing nothing. So I sort of was there for a few months, and they started posting jobs. And then I started as international strategy manager. I grew up in Switzerland and speak French and Spanish. So like the international section of the music industry has always been really interesting to me. So I started there, loved all things licensing and how nerdy it is. And then I found another job in DC at the Kennedy Center, also in legal, doing licensing for sync, but also doing like getting into fields that I had no experience in, like artist visas. So for performing artists, you need to get them specific types of visas to come perform in the US. So I did that there. And then COVID happened. I got in touch with another alumni, Emily White, who was then working on I Voted. And I asked if she needed any help. It was just her and one other person working on it. And together we made it into something much bigger than originally intended. We had over 450 artists performing all on one day. And it was just like the project of a lifetime. It was really fun, very challenging. Worked a lot of hours. I moved in the middle of it. I moved to London in August and worked from here, worked in 2 different time zones. And then, yeah, I already talked about how I ended up at Mandolin from there, but Mandolin was the host for I Voted Festival. And that's where I got to where I am.
That's so cool. And it sounds like you had a very busy year. So glad you could be with us today. Let's go to Sabrina next. I know you said that you have kind of moved to an industry that's adjacent to the music industry. So could you talk a little bit about your journey over there?
Yeah, it's been a long and wild ride. So out of Northeastern, I was fortunate enough to get a co-op in my final semester at Universal Music Group in Nashville. So I started working there in consumer engagement, which was mostly e-commerce, managing their merch sales specifically for album releases and kind of like bundling t-shirt and CDs and concert tickets and things like that. They hired me full-time after my co-op finished. So that was a really great, like, thank you Northeastern for this start into the industry. From there, they made some changes and in the department and eliminated my position, unfortunately, but that did give me the opportunity to really drill down into what I wanted to do, which was marketing. And e-commerce is an element of marketing, but I, from there, started my own independent marketing service, working with independent musicians, creating marketing campaigns, whether it's for a single release, an album release, creating videos to promote an album or things like that. So I really got into kind of all the elements of marketing, whether it was advertisements or social media management or content creation for socials, mostly digital stuff. Eventually that led me into Social Nova Events, which is an events company. They run, if you've ever been to the 90s Bar Crawl or Snow Day Bar Crawl, it was originally Nivik Events, but they changed their name to Social Nova. Very small company and fully remote. So I was working with people all across the country in San Francisco, New York. I was in Nashville, which was a cool experience. And then I got to travel to all the different cities, not all the different cities, but some of the ones where we did these bar crawls, which was also fun. And yeah, so marketing was sort of the crossover there for me of how I went from music marketing into events marketing. And then again, I keep getting jobs at places that consolidate, or, it's times are tough. Again, they basically eliminated their whole staff, but fortunately we were close enough that they gave me enough time to look around. And I decided, again, I have this opportunity to do something different. So I'm going to go back to kind of my roots. In undergrad at Brown University, I did radio. There was a student-run commercial radio station, which is kind of what got me interested in the music industry in the first place, because I was music director there and I got to work directly with label reps at all the major labels, which was really cool. But I started looking for jobs in radio and found this radio operations position in public radio, which is a little bit different than what I had ever done before, but it's NPR. So I thought that's super cool and jumped in and just kind of added and changed my responsibilities as I went, got to do a bit more production stuff this year. And here I am now.
That's incredible. I mean, it sounds like you really took advantage of a bad opportunity and made it into this amazing thing for yourself. So that's so cool to hear. Um, and lastly, Stephanie, would you mind sharing us a little bit about your journey to where you are now?
Sure. Um, Similarly to Sabrina, we actually went to the same graduate program, me, Sabrina, and Melanie. And I actually bumped into her while I was an intern, or was it, I can't remember if I was an intern, if maybe it was right after when I was hired for university. I don't remember, but I remember we bumped into each other when you were at UMG Nashville, right?
Yeah, because I came up to UMG in New York to work with the team.
Yeah, that was, I mean, that was amazing. Like just to like see someone that I knew, it just shows how small the industry is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, during my internship, which thank you Northeastern, because that was through Northeastern, I made some really, really good connections with a lot of the staff that was there. And in fact, those connections are also Northeastern connections. They all came from Northeastern. And what I think a lot of people might not know is Lucian, the CEO of Universal, is the board of trustee at Northeastern and has a very good relationship with Northeastern. So they have a lot of employees from Northeastern there right now, currently. But yeah, basically, I had a similar journey to Sabrina. I was in A&R. I got hired like directly after my internship, and I was still at North. I was still doing classes, like I did an independent study, which was very helpful. Sorry about my email going off. And I remember, I was sitting and writing a paper, and I just never left. I kind of inserted myself into Universal. And I remember the internship ended and I was making any excuse to come into the office. I was doing expenses for people. They were like paying me on the side to do just to come in and help out. And then one day, the head of A&R just came up to me and she's like, "Hey, could I talk to you?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I was like, "Oh shoot, she's gonna tell me I can't be here, like that it's like, you gotta leave." And she says, "Do you want a job?" And I was like, "Yes, I want a job. Yes, please." And then I just, I stayed with them. She, they were restructuring the company, similar to what Sabrina said earlier. She actually left. And then I was kind of like floating in the A&R department, but I still had some really great opportunities, met some really cool people, some really awesome artists. Um, and then, they terminated my position as well, since it really didn't have a purpose, since the person who hired me was no longer there. After like a year, they let me like hang on. But when they did that, since I had met so many people, I met someone in business affairs, one of the head attorneys. She mostly does Island and Def Jam. Now she's really strictly Def Jam. And she basically said, "Do you want a job?" And I said, "Yes, please, because otherwise I'm screwed." And she hired me. But, I really started at the bottom. Like I had to climb my way to the top. And basically what I did was I said, "You know what, I'm just going to make myself as useful and helpful as possible." And I was assisting 3 senior vice presidents. They worked across the 3 labels. But then I also noticed, there was this clearance team. It's very small. It was like 3 people. And I could see how hard they were working, how everything was so fast paced, and they looked like they needed some help. And I started talking to the head of that department, Antoinette Trotman, and I said, like, "Look, let me know if there's anything I could do to help." And she was like, "Actually, yeah, help, please." And then one day, it just kind of happened. Like she just said, I got called into the EVP and the business affairs office, and he said, "Hey, you're not going to be assisting anymore. This is what we want you to do." And I said, "Okay." And then I started meeting with Ian, which we have a great connection because I actually went to undergrad for piano performance. So I have a really extensive knowledge of music theory and understanding what is and is not generic in terms of like music composition. And he's got an amazing mind, and we just connected very well. So I felt like I could be very useful to him since he's not very organized, and he just kind of is like very like comes when he can, does what he can, and I just kind of like structure everything for him, prioritize for him, and it works really well. But yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am.
That's so incredible to hear. You really got your foot in the door and then went for it from there. That's amazing. As we're starting to get more questions from the audience in, I think we're going to narrow it down to 1 to 2 people. So what I'll do is I'll just pose a question, and if anyone wants to answer, feel free to just unmute and go for it. So our first question comes from Cassandra, and she is actually a prospective student, so she's still in high school. Cassandra says, I'm interested in studying music business in college and want to get more involved in the industry before school. What are some examples of ways that a high school student could become more involved in the industry? And what advice do you have for your younger self that was just starting out in the industry? Do any of the 4 of you want to tackle that one?
I could answer that.
Go for it.
I really wish because I honestly wasn't, I wish I had known this is what I really wanted in high school. I did know I wanted to work for a label, but I wasn't sure, I didn't know much about it. I wasn't very educated on it. I think the best way is to go to events and talk to people, reach out on LinkedIn. I actually just had a meeting with a student from my undergrad school because I just said, yeah, I want to help. People want to help. And executives want to talk to students. They love talking about themselves. And you can create a lasting relationship. And then when your name comes up along the way, you could say, hey, I actually met you before, and then keep the conversation going. I think that's the best way. Go to events, network, meet people, ask if you can assist or help or do whatever you can to be involved.
I have another answer to this too. One of the coolest things I've ever heard a mom doing for her kid before she went to high school, before college, was in order to help her choose what she wanted to study in college, she had her shadow a bunch of different people in their jobs. So I would take advantage of that. And even if you know you want to study music, even just shadowing people as a high school student, as you think about studying music, you can get a lot of experience and a foot in the door, and it could lead to co-op opportunities or tons of other things, but they're much more willing to have a high school student shadow than a college or after that.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that, but that's genius. Amazing. Okay, well, thank you so much for those answers. For this next one, I'm going to turn to Colleen and Sabrina a bit more. So this comes from Rosie. She asks, what advice do you have in terms of resources at Northeastern? Are there any things like clubs, classes, or connections that you wish you took more advantage of, or that you're glad you did? I think we have a graduate and undergraduate student here, so that'd be a perfect split. So if either of you wants to tackle that one first, feel free.
Sure. I can speak to the undergraduate experience a little bit. I was in MISA, which was really helpful, just getting to know, your fellow students, and kind of people were really creative there in terms of what they were interested in professionally, and then also on the side. And co-op obviously is the kind of number one thing that I think all of us can say helps lead us in our careers. Use that time to explore different opportunities, something you maybe think that you don't necessarily want to work in. You get some experience, you meet some people, and you learn something, and you can take that with you whether or not you want to pursue that further in your career.
From the graduate perspective, I feel like it's kind of hard to get involved in student activities as a graduate student. It's just not commonly done. But I did for a little bit work with the student record label. I believe it's Green Line Records, which I think that's the name, which was great. And I only worked with them for a little bit because I met through them an artist, her name's Shay Rose, and we sort of formed our own little team to do marketing for her. And that's where I got my first real experience, volunteer, but completely building a marketing campaign around an album. So that was great. So I would say Green Line Records is great, and anything you do, anytime that you are I mean, you're in Boston. When you're allowed to go back out to shows again, there are so many shows that you can go to, and just talk to people, make like stuff. I think Stephanie said, one of you said, make those connections, go to shows, and stay connected, especially with those artists. A lot of times local independent artists don't have a huge budget to hire a company, and they'll just be like, hey, I know you're studying marketing for music. Can you help me do my social media for this campaign or something like that? And yeah, just do things, especially in terms of creative stuff. The more you do, the more experience you're going to have. And then when you're out of college, you'll already be able to say, hey, I worked on this campaign. Look at what I can do.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. For this next one, I think I might go to Melanie. This is a big question, but what do you see as the future of live music? When do you think it's going to come back? And do you think it's going to be the same as it was?
Yeah, well, it depends on the country, I guess. Like, it's already back in New Zealand because they were better at handling COVID than we were. But I would say if we're talking US, probably like late fall of this year. But it's going to look different. There will probably be like, you'll need to show proof of vaccine or take a test. I don't think that things are going to be like they were before for at least like two more years, or until coronavirus doesn't exist at all. And I think it'll return as a hybrid. At least that's what my company is betting on, a hybrid of in-person and live stream performances, which for us is just an opportunity to help artists have an even larger following. There's no seating capacity issues with people tuning in online. It's just extra revenue. And we can even like geofence so that we're not cannibalizing tickets from people who live near the venue. So I think it will be this hybrid model. And yeah, I guess everyone's guess is as good as mine as to when live events will really return.
That's awesome, though. Thank you. I'm gonna take your word for that. I'm gonna start planning to go to concerts in like October, November. So I appreciate that. Our next question comes from Ivy. How did you prepare in your undergrad years for a career in the creative field? Colleen, I might turn to you on this one as our undergraduate alumni representative.
Sure. Well, I had never intended to sort of take the creative path in the industry. I was always really interested in the more businessy side of things. I did think I was going to go to law school, and then a few years into working in the industry, kind of decided that I didn't need to. But I will share my most favorite resource. If you haven't read this book, get yourself a copy. That, and then use your professors as ask them questions about their own experience. They can kind of give you advice and guide you.
That's awesome, and that's cool. You had the book on hand. It shows how much it matters. Okay, well, next up we have a question from Sanja. Were your careers sustainable, and were you paid enough at the beginning? Could you make ends meet independently without a family safety net when you were entering the music industry? I'll kind of put that one as a broad one if anyone wants to answer it.
Oh my gosh, I would really like to answer that question.
Then go for it.
Because it was such a struggle. Like, I think, and I didn't have that much of a family safety net. It was more like, you kind of have to hustle and fake it till you make it. Like, I remember when I was an intern, it was a paid internship, but we're talking probably like $11 an hour, or probably something, I don't even remember what it was. It was something like minimum wage. And, living in New York City, that's like very hard to do, to pay a rent, like New York City rent. And at first I was living in like somewhere with a family member in Long Island, but it was 2 hours away. And that wasn't working because, you're there until 7 o'clock at night, and I wasn't going to take the train, and then I didn't have a ride. I found there are deals though, like if you wanted to live at a school, there's like dorms that will help students that are trying to do internships that are a lot more like more cheap and more like reasonable, like that you would be able to handle with a minimum wage job. You just have to look for it. So that's kind of what I did the first few months. I lived at a school in Queens, and I would commute to work every day or to my internship, and that's how I was managing it. And I would take food from the internship. Like I was really hustling. And then one thing I wish someone had told me, if you do get hired out of an internship, like for an entry level position, always, always, always negotiate your salary. Don't ever just jump at it and say yes, because that is something that I did not do. I didn't know that I should negotiate, or that I should at least ask if there was room for more. And looking back on it, I realized I probably could have gotten more. I just was so excited and so grateful for the opportunity that I just didn't think to ask. So yeah, definitely, it's definitely hard, but it's doable. And it definitely helps if you have like maybe one family member that's willing to go half with you on like rent or something like that.
I just want to add to that. So internships aside, your first entry level job in the music industry will be paid poorly. I think is the general rule. And it's a shame because those jobs tend to be in the most expensive cities. But I think making ends meet is possible. That's it. Like there's no luxury. It's just like bare bones rent and food and groceries or whatever. But it varies by the type of job as well. Like the more creative roles will be paid less, and the other like businessy, legal type roles will be paid more. And that was definitely part of my thinking when I was looking at jobs. I mean, I would have loved to try something a little more creative, but it was not possible. And I was really interested in licensing and stuff too, but those jobs will generally pay better.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys for your honesty. And yeah, I think you're right that the first job is never going to be the highest paid, but I would never have thought of that, like staying in a dorm out of school. That's really, really smart. Okay, so I will turn to Sabrina for this next question. This is from Paul, I believe. So he says, you are all amazing success stories, and he wished that Northeastern had offered this major when he was there years ago. So would you be willing to point him in the right direction for networking in general now?
That's a really interesting and kind of a tough question, because all of my networking has just depended on where I was and who I met. Right now, I think I stay in touch with the music industry mostly through Facebook groups. So there were a couple of groups that I joined when I was in Nashville, and they tend to be kind of Nashville specific. So I don't know if that is helpful. I was in Solid, which is Society of Leaders in Development, and in Nashville, which is sort of like a younger music industry group, networking and just sort of social group. That's one. For the other women out there, Music Biz Besties, look it up on Facebook. They have people in Nashville, New York, LA, kind of all over the world, I think, even other countries. And it's for women in the music industry. I think they have virtual networking events. They have a lot of resources, and it's just very like easy to meet some people, post in there if you have any kind of question. People are very welcoming to new people in the industry in that group. Don't know if this is being helpful to Paul, but I guess I would just say, talk to anyone. If you're in a city, or if you ever go to a city, just talk, exchange business cards, make connections. Google or just look up music business groups on Facebook or on LinkedIn in your area, and be active in there, ask questions, answer questions, and then you never know who you'll meet and who you might make plans with and connect outside of the internet later on.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I threw that one at you and you did very well. Amazing. So we have another question. This is an anonymous one, but what majors and minors at Northeastern would you recommend studying if you have a strong interest working in the music industry at some capacity? We can maybe focus a little bit more on the minors. I'm not sure if Melanie or Colleen, you guys want to take this one. But what other educational ideas do you guys see in Northeastern as being valuable?
Yeah, we're kind of back and forth. I had a business minor, which I found really helpful. I think communications, anything in business, anything a little bit, more creative or artsy, really anything that you think would kind of, the music industry, although it's small in people numbers, it's pretty vast in the resources and different things that it pulls from. So if you feel like you can tie it into the music industry, that's going to be helpful for you, and don't hesitate to study it.
I don't know if that was an either Melanie or Colleen question or both.
Go for it.
I just missed like the beginning part of the question. Was this about minors?
Yeah, just in general, like it asked if there were majors or minors you recommend taking, but just like any other educational supplements.
Right. So it depends what field you want to go into in the music industry. Like if you want to work in licensing or at a label or publisher, I would suggest like data science or, business minor will give you some of that data science, but so much of what we do is about being good at Excel and like learning how to create I don't know, not like databases and connecting things via unique identifiers, like that. Those hard skills are a really good complement to the informational type of education you get in a music business program.
Well, thank you for that. I imagine, now more than ever being online and all that stuff, there's a lot of, data science and various things like that. Craig Bettinson put this in the chat. I'm just going to plug this right now. There is a LinkedIn group for Northeastern University music majors. There's over 450 people in there. So if you want to start networking, feel free to join that. In addition, Craig asked, is there value in Clubhouse for the music industry?
I'm curious if Clubhouse has started to get licenses for them, because I know they have some performances on there now.
I actually don't know a lot about Clubhouse, but it's weird. I did literally days ago got some requests on Instagram to join some group on Clubhouse, but I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I don't know a lot about it, but it seems like it's starting to buzz in the industry.
Awesome. Then we can sit and watch it for now. Our next question comes from Savannah. So she has just been admitted to Northeastern, but is still deciding which college is right for her. She says, I'm curious as to how the backdrop of Boston can aid in looking for internships and getting used to the music industry. Is it a good city for going in the industry?
I can give my 2 cents on that. And again, I didn't do my undergraduate in Boston. I think that part of the beauty of Northeastern is that you can do your co-ops anywhere. So keep that in mind. Boston has a lot of really good music venues, a pretty decent local music scene. I think it was a great place to do undergrad or grad school. I will say, I think you have to leave Boston to really get moving in the music industry once you're in your career. I've heard the same thing from artists too. A lot of people left Boston for like LA because there sort of seems to be a cap of how high you can get or what you can do. There aren't record labels or management companies or anything like that in Boston. If you want to work in live music, there are some good live music venues or radio or things like that. So it kind of depends on what you're most interested in doing. I would say I love Boston. I'm originally from Massachusetts, so I'm a little bit biased. But I think it's a great place for college. And then maybe do your co-ops in different cities so that you start to make those connections and know that you can move somewhere else after you graduate.
I would
Amazing.
just echo what Sabrina said there, that it's a really good, I think Boston's a great place to kind of get your feet wet and then explore further in your co-ops, and it'll prepare you better for moving into somewhere, a bigger city like a New York or LA, where if you went there initially, I mean, not for everyone, but it could be overwhelming. I think Boston's a really good place. I mean, I'm also from Massachusetts, so probably biased, but definitely a good place to get your feet wet in the industry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, our next question is from Viren, and he is an undergraduate looking for a job soon after graduation. Did any of you ever apply to jobs where you didn't fulfill every single requirement they were looking for?
I won't say that I know that I didn't require, I don't know if I filled every requirement for the job I'm currently in. I think what I will say though is if you do get an interview at any company and it's entry level, it's very, very important that you know what you want to do, like what is your goal? Because I think, you know, and I've heard this from past interns that also were from Northeastern and interviewed at Universal. And one of the questions that they always get asked by very high up executives is, you know, do you want to do marketing, or where do you see yourself? Do you want to do A&R? Do you want to do, like, what do you want to do? If you don't have a direction and you're not clear on what your plan is, then that looks like you're just kind of trying to get a job and you don't care. I think it's really important to, you know, if you're applying to a marketing role or you're applying to even assist someone that's in marketing, they usually want to drive you forward and they want to know that you have direction. That's very important.
I want to not completely counter that, but add sort of a counterpoint that I've definitely applied to roles where I didn't fit every single requirement. I can't remember exactly what jobs they were or whether or not it worked out for me, but I will say, yes, it's good to know what you want, but also be willing to do other things or to explore something you didn't think you were going to do. Like I finished, when I was at Northeastern, I decided I wanted to do marketing. And then I got this co-op in consumer engagement, which was a very specific piece of marketing that I did not know very much about at the time, but I was like, it's a foot in the door at Universal Music Group. I'm going to take it. And I learned a lot through that. So I guess, yeah, just be open to different opportunities, even if it's something that where you don't check every single box or the job doesn't check every single box of your dream job. Go for it and see what happens.
I have also applied to many jobs that I didn't fully meet the requirements for. One was the Kennedy Center. I was a paralegal there. I do not have a paralegal certificate, but my background was in music and copyright. So I was able to get that job. I was surprised that I got an interview at all, but as long as you can cater your resume to match as many of the words and types of experience to the job description, you can do pretty well. And then I just saw Craig's note about the hiring process in the music industry. And this sort of ties into whether or not you have all the qualifications. Most of the time you get an interview because somebody you know recommends you. That's like the majority of music industry jobs. So if you have that person recommending you, you're much more likely to be considered for a job that you don't have all of the requirements for as well.
Amazing. That's really good to hear. And I think, you know, for anyone who's worried about co-op too, it's hopefully a little bit flexible as well. Thank you guys so much. So for our next question, I'll open this up to everyone, I think, because this is important. What sort of progress have you seen for women in the music industry, as it is historically a male-dominated field? I know this is a heavy one.
I'm just gonna jump in because no one's saying anything. I've seen more and more women working in the music industry. So I've been working in it for like 8 years now, and I see more female executives. The CEO of Mandolin is a woman, and she's been featured in Billboard. So I think there's a lot of progress. And Billboard has its like top female executives. My dream is that there's no more top female executives published, but just like all executives, and that women have good representation on that list. And I think we're moving in the right direction there. And it's really just women working and doing a good job that's changing things. Not that they weren't before, but they weren't given the chance to in like the olden days.
I agree. I think we're moving in the right direction. I've definitely seen more and more over the years. It's slower than I would like it to be, especially at those higher levels. I see plenty of women working in the music industry. I think it's, you know, when you look at the owners of companies, there are more and more female executives, but they're still sort of promoted as like the outlier. Like, look how great it is that this woman became an executive. It shouldn't be an abnormal thing. I will say for the radio perspective, I feel like it's even slower there. Think about like your favorite radio station and the morning show and all the shows, like there may be one day part where there's only a female voice. I feel like that's always a struggle. And in my experience in radio, there was a lot of that boys club mentality. But I think it's just being called out more and more these days, and hopefully that will push progress to happen.
Just to add to what Sabrina's saying, I do still see the boys club mentality, but in the record labels, but more so in like the more creative departments, like A&R departments. I definitely see progress because when, you know, just thinking about my own journey, and actually all of my opportunities were given to me by women, and women that were in leadership roles. Like when I first was hired in A&R, it was a woman that was head of A&R, and that was a big deal at the time, and that was 2015. That wasn't that long ago. But I remember it was like this huge deal that it was going to be a woman, a female head, and it didn't last very long. And I did feel at the time, you know, going into A&R meetings, that it was a bunch of men, and not only men, a lot of white men. And we would be talking about like sometimes hip hop, and I felt very uncomfortable speaking up sometimes, even though, you know, as a woman of color, I feel like I could contribute more, and I should have. But I do think now it does feel like, you know, I work with mostly women in the business affairs department, and some of these same women have moved on to work in A&R departments and head those departments. I have a very close friend that moved from my department, and she's now director of A&R at Island. So I do think there's definitely progress being made.
I want to add too that it varies. Obviously, there are definitely some very sexist people in the music industry, but I think a lot of the time the boys club isn't intentional. It just happens naturally because people are drawn to people who are like them. I've just seen so many men in leadership roles who kind of take another guy under their wing because they're like, you remind me of a younger me. And I think that speaks to, you know, we need more women in those roles to do what happened to Stephanie and take a woman under their wings, or generally just be open to mentoring and fostering people who are not like you. It's a natural instinct, and it's hard to resist. But yeah, I think it sort of is a self-perpetuating system that we need to like really get in there and break.
100%. Thank you so much for sharing. As we're getting a little close on time, I think we're going to do 2 more questions. So this first one is, what lessons have you learned throughout your career, or what's something that you wish you had known just before graduating?
I think Stephanie made this point earlier, but one of the most, I think, invaluable things you can do is to make yourself invaluable. Be interested, be innovative, be creative, and that's for any kind of position that you're in, whether you're on the legal and business affairs side or whether you're in a more creative role. If you make yourself invaluable, you will find your way, find yourself rising through the ranks.
I was just going to say, when you're going into these internships, don't be afraid to be seen. It can be really intimidating to be in, a major corporation and around all these very high up executives. And I had this, feeling sometimes I was very intimidated. Just force yourself out of it. Ask executives to get coffee, ask to meet with them, ask a lot of questions, and don't be worried about being annoying to them, because it's those same interns that are annoying that end up being VP a few years later. I swear. It's those same annoying interns. I have several people in mind, and they're doing very well, and they were super annoying.
I don't know if people will. I would like to hear if you guys disagree with this, but from my experience, a thing I wish I had known is sometimes you can't work your way into having more responsibilities or a promotion, and that it's slow depending on the size of the organization you're at. I was a big go-getter when I first graduated, and I thought well, I'm just going to work super hard, and then after 2 years I'll be director or something. And I thought that that's the way it worked. And it is the way it works in some companies. So I would say think very carefully about the type of company you want to work at. I work at a startup now, which is amazing, and I wish I had started at a startup, because you can rise through the ranks very quickly if you work hard. Other larger companies that I've worked at, they have hiring and promotion cycles, and sometimes a certain number of years you have to work there before you can have a title, even if you're very qualified to do the job now. So I guess just I wish I had known how the politics of larger organization worked before I graduated.
Yeah, I think what I was going to say is somewhat related, which is that I wish someone had told me there's no one path in the music industry. There's so many different directions you can go in. And when I was first starting out, I sort of felt like I had to get a job at a record label. I had to work all the time to make an impression and work my way up. And it's great if you can do that. But if that doesn't work for you, then going in a different direction is fine. I had a lot of just the impression that if you can't make it to a high level at a major record label, then it's because you couldn't hack it in some way, which is not true. It's just, it's tough. It's a tough industry. And also, like Melanie said, you might prefer to work at a smaller company. You might prefer to work at something in radio, or you might find yourself going in a totally different path than you expected. And that is completely okay. Yeah, I guess just don't worry so much about whether or not you're going to make it, because you can make your career. You can make the choices as to where you go and what works best for you and what you want to prioritize.
That's incredible. Thank you all so much for sharing. And for this last one, probably the most important question, what was your favorite place on campus? Whether just to hang out or to study or whatever. What's one place on campus that you remember fondly?
Tim, can I ask, are you in a dorm room right now?
I am in a dorm room right now.
Because that door and the handle and stuff, it gives me such great throwback to Northeastern dorm.
Yes, I'm currently in West Village, so I'm glad I can give you the nostalgia.
I don't know if it's still there, but I think my favorite place was Rebecca's. Their sandwiches were so good, and I loved sitting outside of that area and just binge eating and studying.
Yeah, Rebecca's sandwiches, amazing.
I have fond memories of after hours.
100%, yeah.
Honestly, I don't remember very much because I was commuting as a graduate student, so it was a little different of an experience for me. But I guess all I remember is the cafeteria because I'm just such a foodie, and that's where I spent most of my time when I was there.
There you go.
Melanie and Stephanie, I'm trying to remember the name of that bar that we went to a couple times.
Oh yeah.
Connors?
Yeah, I think that's probably the only place that I like hung out a lot around Northeastern. So if and when you're able to drink, that was just always a fun place to go after class or after a test or whatever and blow off some steam.
Yeah, they closed down. I think during COVID.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well then never mind. But that what is that? Massa, I have not been in Boston in way too long, clearly. But there are a lot of different like bars and restaurants along that street that were fun.
Amazing. Well, that takes us to 1:30. So I wanted to say, Colleen, Melanie, Stephanie, and Sabrina, thank you so much for being with us today. I know I learned so much. I'm sure our audience did as well. So everyone, please give a virtual round of applause to these 4 amazing panelists. Thank you again to Lori and to Catherine for setting this up. And to everyone at Northeastern, have a wonderful day and stay safe.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Tim. Best
Bye.
moderator ever.